The great hall on Zarian Prime hummed with voices from 100 different worlds. Delegates from across the galaxy had gathered for another routine meeting of the Galactic Council. The massive chamber stretched upward like a cathedral, its walls lined with crystalline screens, showing star maps and trade routes that connected thousands of civilizations. Elder Kepler walked slowly across the polished floor, his ancient scales clicking against the smooth surface with each careful step. At nearly 400 years old, he was among the oldest members of the Vorthak delegation, and his weathered appearance drew respectful nods from younger representatives. His people had been part of the galactic community for over 3,000 years, long enough to see empires rise and fall like waves on a distant shore. The reptilian elder carried with him a data crystal that contained records older than most of the species in the hall. These were not the usual trade agreements or territorial disputes that filled most council sessions. Instead, the crystal held warnings that had been passed down through generations of Vorthak historians, warnings about a species that most delegates had never heard of. Commander Zixtai of the Hegemony Military Council lounged in his floating chair, his 6 arms gesturing dismissively as he spoke with other military representatives. The Hegemony controlled nearly a quarter of the galaxies. Inhabited worlds and their massive fleets kept the peace through overwhelming force. Zixtal was young by galactic standards, barely 50 years old, and he had earned his position through aggressive expansion campaigns that had brought dozens of worlds under hegemony control. Across the hall, Ambassador Shoralin of the Zephyrian Trade Federation shimmered like living crystal in the chamber's soft light. Her people had mastered faster-than-light travel before most species had even discovered fire, and their trade networks connected every corner of civilized space. The Zephyrians rarely concerned themselves with military matters, preferring to influence galactic affairs through economic pressure and carefully negotiated contracts. When Elder Kepler requested permission to address the assembly, most delegates settled back in their seats expecting another tedious presentation about ancient history. The old Vorthak was known for his long speeches about forgotten civilizations and dusty prophecies that had little relevance to modern galactic politics. Several representatives used the opportunity to review their personal communications or plan their evening meals. The elder's voice carried easily through the chamber's acoustic systems as he began to speak. His words were measured and careful, each phrase chosen with the precision that came from centuries of diplomatic experience. He spoke of records that dated back to the early days of galactic civilization, when the first species had begun to explore the stars and make contact with their neighbors. According to these ancient texts, there had once been warnings about a species called humans, who lived on a small blue world in an unremarkable solar system at the edge of the galaxy. The records described these creatures as unusual among intelligent life, possessing a combination of traits that made them potentially dangerous to the established order of galactic civilization. The humans were said to be highly adaptable, capable of surviving in environments that would kill most other species. They were described as naturally curious, driven to explore and understand everything they encountered. Most troubling of all, the ancient warnings spoke of something the translators could only render as persistence or stubbornness, a refusal to accept defeat even when facing impossible odds. Commander Zixtal's laughter echoed through the chamber as the elder finished his presentation. The military leader's voice carried the confidence of someone who had never faced a serious challenge to his authority. He spoke of recent intelligence reports that described the humans as a primitive species barely capable of reaching their own moon using chemical rockets that any civilized race would consider laughably outdated. The commander's analysts had studied human civilization extensively, and their reports painted a picture of a deeply divided species that seemed incapable of working together on any significant scale. The humans fought constant wars among themselves over resources that any advanced civilization would simply synthesize or trade for. Their planet was divided into hundreds of separate nations, each with its own government and military forces. Ambassador Charolin agreed with the commander's assessment, her crystalline voice ringing like wind chimes as she spoke. The Zephyrian Trade networks had detected no signs of faster-than-light technology in the human solar system, and their primitive industrial capacity suggested they were centuries away from posing any threat to established galactic powers. Her economic models showed that the humans would need at least 500 years of steady development before they could even qualify for associate membership in the galactic community. Other delegates joined the discussion, each offering their own reasons why the ancient warnings could be safely ignored. The insectoid Clixon representative noted that human population growth patterns were unsustainable and would likely lead to ecological collapse within a few generations. The aquatic Nexari ambassador pointed out that humans had never even attempted to establish permanent settlements beyond their home planet, showing a lack of the expansionist drive that characterized successful galactic civilizations. Elder Kethmar listened to these dismissals with growing frustration. He accessed the restricted sections of the ancient archives, calling up warnings that had been classified for millennia. These records spoke of a species that grew stronger through conflict, that treated impossible challenges as opportunities to innovate and adapt. The texts described humans as natural problem solvers who refused to accept limitations imposed by others. The warnings were specific about human behavior patterns that other species found difficult to understand. While most civilizations sought stability and order, humans seemed to thrive on change and uncertainty. They were described as a species that would rather struggle for freedom than accept comfortable subjugation, a trait that had proven dangerous to previous galactic orders. But the assembled delegates had more pressing concerns than ancient prophecies about a species they had never encountered. The hegemony was in the middle of a major territorial expansion that threatened to upset the balance of power between the major civilizations. 3 star systems in the contested border regions had declared independence from Zephyrian control, and the Trade Federation was demanding military support to bring them back into line. The Vorthak Empire was dealing with its own internal problems. As younger generations questioned the wisdom of their elders and demanded a more aggressive stance toward their neighbors. Several colony worlds had experienced riots in recent months, and the Imperial fleet was stretched thin trying to maintain order across their vast territories. The council session continued. Elder Kethmar's warnings were filed away in the official records and promptly forgotten by most of the delegates. The ancient Vorthok gathered his data crystals and prepared to return to his homeworld, knowing that his people's sacred duty to preserve and share these warnings had been fulfilled, regardless of whether anyone chose to heed them. Meanwhile, far across the galaxy on a small blue world called Earth, something remarkable was happening that would have terrified the council delegates if they had known about it. Captain Jake Morrison stood in the command center of the newly constructed orbital research station, watching as teams of human engineers made final preparations for humanity's first attempt at faster-than-light travel. The breakthrough had come 18 months earlier when a damaged alien probe had been recovered from the ocean floor near the Pacific Research Institute. Dr. Lisa Chen and her team of xenotechnology specialists had worked around the clock to understand the probe's advanced systems, reverse engineering principles that had taken other species millennia to develop. Dr. Ben Rodriguez had led the theoretical physics team that translated alien mathematics into human understanding, creating new models of space and time that opened doorways to technologies humanity had only dreamed about. The quantum drive they had built was crude compared to the original alien design, but it represented a leap forward that would have been impossible without the recovered technology to study. Captain Morrison watched the countdown timer reach 0 and felt the station shake slightly as the test vehicle engaged its experimental drive system. For a brief moment, the small craft simply hung in space like any other object in orbit. Then reality seemed to bend around it, and the vehicle vanished in a flash of distorted light. 3 seconds later, sensors detected the test craft's signature. Near the edge of the solar system, over 4 billion kilometers from its starting point. Humanity had just achieved faster-than-light travel, and they had done it by studying and improving upon technology from a civilization that considered them primitives. The implications of this achievement would not become clear for several years. but the foundation had been laid for events that would reshape galactic civilization. The elders had warned about humans, and now those warnings were about to be tested against reality. 2 years had passed since humanity's first successful faster-than-light experiment, and the solar system had become a hub of intense activity. Captain Alex Turner guided his exploration vessel through the outer reaches of the Kuiper Belt, conducting deep space surveys that mapped gravitational anomalies and resource deposits throughout the region. The UES Endeavour was one of 12 ships in humanity's small but growing interstellar fleet, each vessel equipped with the latest improvements to the quantum drive system. The ship's bridge hummed with quiet efficiency as Turner's crew monitored their sensor readings and updated their star charts. Lieutenant Commander Janet Mills sat at the navigation station, plotting courses to nearby star systems that showed signs of habitable worlds. Chief Engineer Paul Martinez worked at his console, fine-tuning the quantum drive's performance and recording data that would help improve future designs. Dr. Susan Brooks occupied the science station, analyzing spectroscopic data from distant stars and searching for signs of artificial structures or energy signatures that might indicate the presence of other civilizations. Her instruments had detected several anomalous readings in recent weeks, but nothing that could be definitively classified as evidence of intelligent life. The routine survey mission became something extraordinary when the ship's proximity sensors detected a massive energy signature approaching from the direction of Alpha Centauri. The readings were unlike anything in humanity's database, showing a power output that dwarfed anything human technology could produce. Whatever was heading toward them was larger and more advanced than any human vessel, Captain Turner ordered his crew to battle stations, but he knew that if the approaching vessel was hostile, the Endeavour would have little chance of survival. The human ship was designed for exploration and scientific research, with only basic defensive systems and a small complement of weapons that had never been tested in actual combat. The alien vessel decloaked less than a kilometer away, its massive bulk blotting out the stars behind it. The ship was nearly 10 times the size of the Endeavour, its hull bristling with weapon systems and sensor arrays that made human technology look primitive by comparison. Strange markings covered its surface, glowing with energy that pulsed in patterns that suggested some form of communication system. Captain Vexter of the Hegemony patrol ship Dominator studied the primitive human vessel through his command displays. The alien craft was smaller than most of his ship's shuttle pods, and its construction suggested a technology level barely adequate for interstellar travel. The quantum drive signature was crude and inefficient, producing energy patterns that any competent engineer could improve upon without significant effort. The Hegemony captain had encountered dozens of species during his career, and he followed standard protocols for making contact with primitive civilizations. Most pre-faster-than-light species reacted to first contact with either terror or overwhelming excitement, and both responses could be easily managed through appropriate displays of superior technology and careful diplomatic messaging. Vexter activated his communication systems and transmitted a standard greeting on frequencies that primitive species typically used for their own communications. He expected the humans to respond with fearful requests for mercy or desperate attempts to demonstrate their peaceful intentions through elaborate displays of submission. Instead, Captain Turner's calm voice filled the Hegemony ship's bridge as he responded to the alien contact. The human captain spoke in clear, measured tones that suggested neither fear nor excessive excitement about the encounter. He identified himself and his vessel, explained their peaceful mission of exploration and scientific research, and requested an opportunity for diplomatic dialogue between their respective civilizations. The response puzzled Vexter, who had never encountered a primitive species that reacted to first contact with such composure. Most pre-FTL civilizations were either terrified by their first glimpse of galactic technology or so overwhelmed by excitement that meaningful communication became difficult. The human captain seemed to take the encounter in stride, as if meeting alien civilizations was a routine part of his job. Captain Turner had spent months preparing for this possibility, studying every piece of recovered alien technology and developing protocols for first contact scenarios. The human crew had trained extensively for encounters with superior alien civilizations, learning to project confidence and competence while avoiding any actions that might be interpreted as threatening or primitive. The diplomatic exchange that followed established the basic framework for humanity's introduction to galactic civilization. Wexler explained the structure of the Galactic Council and outlined the standard process for integrating new species into the established order. According to galactic law, primitive civilizations were granted protected status, which provided certain safeguards against exploitation, while restricting their movement and development until they could be deemed ready for full membership. The process typically took several centuries, during which the new species would be gradually introduced to galactic technology and culture under the careful supervision of established civilizations. Protected worlds were forbidden from developing certain classes of weapons or expanding beyond their home systems without explicit permission from the Galactic Council. Captain Turner listened politely to this explanation, asking thoughtful questions about galactic law and the rights of protected species. His responses demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of interstellar politics that impressed the hegemony captain, who had expected to spend most of the conversation explaining basic concepts to confused primitives. When Wexler finished his presentation of humanity's new status, Turner's response would later be recorded in galactic archives as the first sign that this species might be different from others the Council had encountered. The human captain thanked the hegemony representative for the information, but politely declined the offer of protected status. Turner explained that humanity had never been particularly good at staying where they were told to remain, and that his people preferred to earn their place in the galaxy through their own achievements rather than have it assigned to them by others. He suggested that the two species could benefit from trade, relationships, and cultural exchanges that would allow both civilizations to learn from each other. The conversation continued for several hours, with both captains sharing information about their respective civilizations and discussing the possibilities for future cooperation. Wexler found himself genuinely interested in human culture and technology, particularly their approach to problem-solving and their apparent talent for rapid technological development. Throughout the meeting, the Endeavor's sensor systems conducted detailed scans of the hegemony vessel, recording everything from its hull composition to its energy signatures. The human crew analyzed the alien ship's design principles and construction techniques, adding this information to their growing database of galactic technology. When the encounter finally ended, both vessels went their separate ways with promises to arrange formal diplomatic meetings between their governments. Wexler filed his report with Hegemony Command, describing the humans as a mildly interesting species with potential for eventual integration into galactic civilization. The report was processed through normal channels and filed away in the archives, where it joined thousands of similar first contact reports. The hegemony captain had no way of knowing that his brief encounter with humanity had provided them with detailed technical specifications for advanced faster-than-light drives, shield systems, and weapons technology that would take human engineers only months to understand and improve upon. Within weeks of the first contact, human ships began appearing throughout the galaxy, moving along trade routes and conducting diplomatic missions with species that had never heard of Earth or its inhabitants. The vessels were small and apparently harmless, carrying trade goods and cultural artifacts that demonstrated humanity's growing understanding of galactic civilization. Ambassador Kate Williams established humanity's first embassy on Haven Station, a neutral trading post that served as a meeting ground for dozens of different species. Her diplomatic skills and natural charisma quickly made her a popular figure among the station's diverse population, as she became known for her ability to broker deals between traditionally hostile factions. The ambassador's success opened doors throughout the galaxy, as species that had been impressed by her negotiating skills invited human representatives to visit their homeworlds and participate in trade agreements. Each diplomatic mission provided opportunities for human scientists and engineers to study new technologies and learn About different approaches to interstellar civilization, Admiral Chris Anderson began organizing joint training exercises with species interested in learning about human tactical innovations. The humans had developed unique approaches to space combat that emphasized mobility and precision over brute force, and several military organizations were curious to see how these techniques might complement their own strategies. 5 years had passed since humanity's first contact with galactic civilization, and the changes were remarkable for those who knew where to look. Captain Lisa Park commanded the human trade vessel Use Horizon as it made its regular journey between Earth and the frontier worlds, carrying cargo that appeared routine to casual observers but represented something far more significant to those who understood its true purpose. The ship's manifest listed agricultural equipment, medical supplies, and consumer electronics bound for the Outer Rim colonies. What the official records did not show were the advanced manufacturing systems hidden within the cargo holds. Sophisticated devices that could produce everything from defensive weapons to communication networks using locally available materials. Captain Park walked through the ship's converted cargo bay, watching as her crew prepared the latest shipment for delivery to the Klixen colonies in the Arcturus sector. The insectoid species had been struggling with food production on their desert worlds for centuries, barely managing to sustain their growing population with traditional farming methods that were poorly suited to their harsh environment. Dr. Janet Coleman supervised the loading of agricultural processors that had been specifically designed for Klixen physiology and environmental conditions. The machines looked like standard farming equipment, but they incorporated innovations from a dozen different species, creating hybrid technologies that could increase crop yields by several 100% while requiring minimal maintenance. Engineer Bob Stevens checked the calibration on water purification systems that could extract moisture from the thin atmosphere of desert worlds, providing reliable sources of clean water for agricultural and industrial use. The technology combined human atmospheric processing techniques with Zephyrian molecular filters and Vorthak energy systems, creating devices that were more efficient than anything any single species could have developed alone. The Horizon's medical bay contained supplies that represented humanity's growing understanding of alien biology and physiology. Dr. Corinne Phillips had worked with xenobiologists from dozens of species to develop treatments for diseases that had plagued galactic civilization for millennia. Her research teams had discovered that many conditions considered incurable by individual species could be treated using techniques borrowed from other civilizations. When the ship arrived at Klixen Prime, Captain Park was greeted by Hive Leader Zachthie, whose compound eyes gleamed with anticipation as he reviewed the cargo manifests. The insectoid leader had worked with human traders for 3 years, and each delivery had brought improvements that transformed life on his world in ways that seemed almost magical. The agricultural equipment that humans provided had already revolutionized farming on 17 Klixen worlds, turning barren landscapes into productive agricultural centers that could support populations twice their previous size. The medical supplies had eliminated 3 major diseases that had killed thousands of Klixen each year, while the communication systems had connected isolated colonies and allowed for coordinated development across the entire star system. What impressed Zachthie most about human traders was their approach to business relationships. Unlike the Zephyrian merchants who demanded exclusive contracts and restrictive trade terms, humans seemed genuinely interested in helping their trading partners become more prosperous and self-sufficient. They shared knowledge freely and worked collaboratively to solve problems that had seemed impossible. Just a few years earlier, similar transformations were taking place throughout the galaxy as human ships visited worlds that had been struggling under the established economic order. The aquatic Nexari had improved their underwater manufacturing capabilities dramatically using human industrial processes adapted for their liquid environment. Their production efficiency had increased by over 200%, allowing them to compete effectively with established suppliers for the first time in centuries. The reptilian Sorok had adopted human approaches to resource management that allowed them to extract valuable minerals from asteroids that other species considered worthless. Their mining operations now produced rare elements that were essential for advanced technology, giving them leverage in negotiations with species that had previously dismissed them as economically insignificant. Dr. Sam Foster led scientific exchange programs that brought together researchers from dozens of different species to work on collaborative projects. These programs were officially described as cultural exchanges designed to promote understanding between civilizations, but they served a more important purpose by allowing human scientists to study the techniques and technologies of every major galactic power. The exchange programs were remarkably successful, producing breakthrough discoveries that benefited all participants while advancing human understanding of galactic science and technology. Foster's teams had learned to adapt their research methods to work with alien psychology and biology, creating hybrid approaches that combine the best aspects of multiple scientific traditions. General Nicole Baker quietly built something unprecedented in galactic history, a truly integrated military force that maximized the natural advantages of each participating species. Her joint training exercises brought together volunteer forces from dozens of worlds, officially described as cultural exchange programs, but actually serving as development sessions for combined tactics that had never been attempted before. The general's approach was radically different from traditional galactic military doctrine, which typically forced subject species to adopt the weapons and tactics of their dominant partners. Instead, Baker studied the natural abilities of each species and developed strategies that allowed them to contribute their unique strengths to combined operations. The insectoid Clixon excelled at coordinated swarm tactics that could overwhelm larger forces through superior numbers and perfect coordination. The aquatic Nexari were masters of three-dimensional movement in space, able to execute maneuvers that other species found disorienting and confusing. The crystalline Zephyrians could process tactical information at incredible speeds, making them ideal for command and control operations. Baker's training exercises demonstrated that these diverse abilities could be combined into tactical approaches that were far more effective than any single species could achieve alone. Her volunteer forces practiced scenarios that emphasized cooperation and mutual support, learning to fight as unified teams rather than competing factions. The established galactic powers remained largely unaware of these developments, distracted by increasing unrest throughout their territories. Worlds that had accepted subjugation for centuries were suddenly demanding better treatment, improved trade terms, and representation in galactic government. The timing of these demands seemed suspiciously coordinated, but the major civilizations were too busy dealing with immediate crises to investigate the underlying causes. The hegemony faced rebellions on dozens of worlds, as colonial populations demanded independence or at least greater autonomy in managing their own affairs. The military forces that had previously maintained order through intimidation found themselves dealing with organized resistance movements that seemed to have access to advanced weapons and communication systems. The Zephyrian Trade Federation encountered similar problems as their economic monopolies came under challenge from upstart competitors who somehow had access to manufacturing techniques that allowed them to produce goods at a fraction of traditional costs. Trade routes that had been profitable for millennia were becoming unprofitable as new suppliers offered better products at lower prices. The Vorthek Empire struggled with internal divisions as younger generations questioned the wisdom of their elders and demanded more aggressive responses to external threats. Several colonial governors had been assassinated by unknown rebels, and the imperial fleet was stretched thin trying to maintain security across their vast territories. In each case, human diplomats seemed to be present during the negotiations that followed these crises, offering helpful suggestions and alternative perspectives that often led to peaceful resolutions. Ambassador Williams had become a respected mediator whose services were requested by species throughout the galaxy, and her success rate in resolving disputes was unprecedented in galactic diplomatic history. The humans always appeared to be neutral observers, but their presence during every major crisis was becoming difficult to ignore. Elder Kethmer, now ancient even by Vorthek standards, watched these developments with growing alarm and sent increasingly urgent reports to the Galactic Council warning that the ancient prophecies were being fulfilled, the Elders' warnings described. A pattern that was becoming visible to those who knew what to look for. The humans were not conquering worlds through military force or economic domination. Instead, they were making existing governments irrelevant by offering their subjects better alternatives and teaching them to demand the rights and opportunities they deserved. Every world that established trade relationships with humanity experienced dramatic improvements in living standards, technological capabilities, and economic opportunities. The crisis began in the outer territories of the hegemony, where 17 worlds had simultaneously declared independence and formed what they called the Free Worlds Alliance. The announcement came as a shock to Hegemony Command, who had received no intelligence warnings about coordinated rebellion activities in the region. The colonial worlds had shown no previous signs of organized resistance, and their sudden unity suggested outside influence. Fleet Admiral Mortex commanded the hegemony. Response force from his flagship Retribution, a massive dreadnought that carried enough firepower to devastate entire planets. His fleet consisted of 230 vessels, including some of the most advanced warships in galactic space. The admiral had built his reputation by crushing rebellions quickly and brutally, making examples that discouraged other worlds from attempting similar acts of defiance. The rebel coalition should have been helpless against such overwhelming force. The rebellious worlds had no significant military assets, and their combined populations were barely 1% of the hegemony's total. Most of their defense forces consisted of outdated patrol boats and civilian vessels that had been hastily converted for military use. Admiral Mortex expected the rebellion to collapse as soon as his fleet arrived in the contested systems. Previous colonial uprisings had typically ended within hours of the first demonstration of hegemony firepower, with rebel leaders surrendering unconditionally to avoid total destruction of their worlds. Instead, the admiral found himself facing a coalition that seemed remarkably well prepared for interstellar warfare. The rebel fleet that met his forces at the edge of the Kepler system included ships from a dozen different species, many of them equipped with weapons and defensive systems that appeared more advanced than anything in the hegemony database. Admiral Don Cooper commanded the human ships that were officially present as neutral observers, monitoring the situation on behalf of the Galactic Council's Peacekeeping Committee. The human fleet consisted of only 12 vessels, small craft that looked insignificant compared to the massive hegemony dreadnoughts arrayed against them. Cooper had spent years studying hegemony military doctrine and ship design, analyzing captured intelligence and developing tactical approaches specifically designed to exploit weaknesses in their systems. His ships carried weapons that had been developed using technology borrowed from dozens of different species, creating hybrid systems that could penetrate hegemony shields and armor with devastating effectiveness. When Admiral Mortex ordered his forces to begin bombardment of civilian targets on the rebel worlds, Cooper declared that humanity could not stand by while innocents were being slaughtered. The human fleet moved to intercept the hegemony attack, officially acting under galactic laws that required neutral parties to prevent war. Crimes during military conflicts. The Battle of Kepler Station became a turning point in galactic history, though few observers at the time understood its true significance. The engagement began when Captain Amy Rodriguez in the UES Defiance positioned her vessel directly between a hegemony dreadnought and the civilian habitats it was preparing to destroy. Rodriguez had commanded exploration vessels for most of her career, but she had trained extensively for combat operations using scenarios developed by General Baker's tactical teams. Her ship was 1/10 the size of her opponent, but it moved with precision and speed that made it nearly impossible to target effectively. The Defiance struck the dreadnought's shield generators with surgical precision, using weapons that had been specifically designed to overload hegemony defensive systems. Within minutes, the massive warship found itself vulnerable to attacks from rebel vessels that had previously been unable to penetrate its defenses. Commander Rick Thompson's engineering teams had spent months analyzing captured hegemony technology, identifying critical systems and developing weapons specifically designed to cause maximum damage with minimal energy expenditure. They knew exactly where to strike to disable enemy vessels without resorting to the massive firepower that traditional tactics required. The human ships fought like dancers, striking weak points and disappearing before return fire could reach them. Their tactics were unlike anything the hegemony had encountered, emphasizing mobility and precision over the brute force approaches that dominated galactic military doctrine. Captain Steve Johnson commanded the UES Intrepid as it led a coordinated attack on the hegemony flagship, working in perfect synchronization with rebel vessels from 6 different species. The combined force moved as a single unit, each ship contributing its unique capabilities to a tactical approach that maximized their collective strengths. The battle raged for 18 hours across the entire star system, with fighting taking place simultaneously around 3 different planets and their associated space stations. The hegemony forces found themselves unable to concentrate their firepower effectively, as their opponents refused to engage in the type of direct confrontations that traditional galactic warfare emphasized. Admiral Mortex watched in growing dismay as his supposedly overwhelming fleet was systematically dismantled by forces that should have been helpless against his superior numbers and firepower. His ships were being destroyed or disabled faster than they could inflict damage on their opponents, and his tactical advantages were being neutralized by enemy strategies he did not understand. The turning point came when Captain Rodriguez led a combined force of human and rebel ships in a direct assault on the hegemony flagship. The Retribution was the most powerful warship in the galaxy, protected by shields that could withstand planetary bombardment and armed with weapons capable of destroying entire fleets. Rodriguez's attack force approached the dreadnought using a 3-dimensional formation that confused the enemy targeting systems and prevented effective defensive fire. Each ship in the formation struck a different target, overwhelming the flagship's defensive capabilities and causing critical systems failures throughout the massive vessel. Commander Thompson's technical teams had identified the precise frequency needed to cause resonance failures in hegemony shield generators, and their weapons struck with perfect timing to create cascade effects that brought down the entire defensive grid. Once the shields failed, rebel weapons could target the critical systems that kept the massive ship operational. The battle ended when Admiral Mortex was forced to abandon his flagship as its power systems failed and its hull began to break apart. Under the stress of multiple system failures, the most powerful warship in the hegemony fleet had been destroyed by forces that were supposed to be primitives armed with obsolete technology. The surviving hegemony vessels retreated in disorder, carrying reports that would shock the galactic establishment. The rebels had not only won a decisive victory, they had demonstrated tactical capabilities that suggested access to intelligence about hegemony military systems that should have been impossible for primitive species to obtain. News of the battle spread throughout the galaxy within days, carried by merchant ships and diplomatic couriers who could barely believe the reports they were transmitting. The mighty hegemony fleet had been defeated by a coalition of rebel worlds that had somehow acquired advanced weapons and tactical knowledge that allowed them to fight as equals against supposedly superior forces. The victory had implications that extended far beyond the immediate military situation. Species throughout the galaxy began to reconsider their relationships with the established powers, wondering if the old order was as permanent and unchangeable as they had been taught to believe. The Galactic Council convened in emergency session to address the crisis, with delegates demanding explanations for how rebel forces had acquired advanced technology and tactical intelligence. Elder Kethmar, despite his advanced age, addressed the assembly with warnings that had taken on new urgency in light of recent events. The ancient Vorthak spoke of prophecies that described exactly the kind of transformation that was now taking place throughout the galaxy. The warnings had predicted that humans would not conquer through superior force, but would instead make their opponents irrelevant by teaching everyone around them to fight more effectively and work together more efficiently. The elders' words carried weight that they had lacked in previous presentations. as delegates began to understand that the patterns he described matched the events they were witnessing. The humans had been quietly studying galactic civilization for years, learning about the strengths and weaknesses of every major power while building relationships with species that had been overlooked or marginalized by the dominant civilizations, but the Council's response revealed how little they truly understood about their new rivals. Instead of seeking diplomatic solutions or attempting to address the underlying causes of the rebellion, they decided to eliminate the human threat at its source by dispatching their combined fleets to Earth. The decision was exactly what humanity had been preparing for since their first contact with galactic civilization. Captain Cooper transmitted coded messages to human assets throughout the galaxy, activating plans that had been developed over years of careful preparation and strategic positioning. The combined galactic fleet that arrived at the edge of the Sol system was the most powerful military force ever assembled in galactic history. Over 3,000 vessels from 12 different species had united under a single command structure, carrying enough firepower to reduce entire worlds to molten slag. Fleet Marshal Krixver commanded this unprecedented armada from his flagship Annihilation, confident that no force in the galaxy could stand against such overwhelming power. The Marshal had expected to find Earth defended by whatever primitive vessels humanity could hastily assemble, probably supported by a few rebel allies who had been foolish enough to challenge galactic authority. Instead, his sensors detected defensive installations throughout the solar system that rivaled anything the major civilizations could construct. Admiral Helen Price commanded Earth's defenses from Unity Station, a massive orbital platform that coordinated the activities of defensive systems spread across billions of kilometers of space. Her command displays showed weapon emplacements on every major body in the solar system, from the solar collection arrays around Mercury to the ice mining platforms near Neptune. The moon had been transformed into a fortress bristling with rail gun installations that could accelerate projectiles to significant fractions of light speed. Mars hosted manufacturing centers that could produce warships and defensive systems using resources extracted from the asteroid belt. Even the gas giants had been equipped with weapons platforms that used their gravitational fields to enhance the destructive power of their attacks. Captain Gary Williams led the first human fleet to engage the invaders at the edge of the solar system, commanding vessels that moved with coordination that seemed impossible for ships of their size. His forces struck the enemy formation like surgical instruments, targeting command vessels and support ships while avoiding direct confrontation with the heaviest dreadnoughts that formed the core of the galactic force. The human ships fought using tactics that had been developed through years of studying galactic military doctrine and identifying weaknesses that could be exploited by smaller, more agile forces. They moved in three-dimensional formations that confused enemy targeting systems and struck with weapons specifically designed to penetrate the shields and armor of each major species. Dr. Pete Chang's research teams had spent years developing hybrid technologies that combined innovations from dozens of different civilizations. Human vessels now carried weapons that fired crystalline fragments accelerated by magnetic systems and guided by artificial intelligence programs that had learned from studying the tactical databases of every major galactic power. The invading fleet's commanders quickly discovered that they were not fighting the same primitive species they had dismissed years earlier. These humans moved with the precision of the Zephyrians, struck with the calculated ferocity of the Vorthek, and demonstrated technological innovations that surpassed anything in their databases. Fleet Marshal Krixver watched in growing alarm as his supposedly invincible armada was systematically dismantled by forces that should have been helpless against such overwhelming numbers. His tactical advantages were being neutralized by enemy strategies that seemed to anticipate every move his commanders made, as if the humans had access to detailed intelligence about galactic military systems. The real shock came when the battle reached Earth's orbital space and the human defenders revealed that they were not fighting alone. Ships from the Free Worlds Alliance emerged from concealment throughout the outer system, their positions carefully coordinated to maximize the effectiveness of their combined firepower. the aquatic Nexari had secretly moved their mobile cities to positions around Jupiter's moons, where they could launch attacks using their superior ability to maneuver in three-dimensional space. Their vessels struck the galactic fleet from unexpected angles, using weapons that had been developed through collaboration with human engineers and adapted for their unique combat capabilities. The insectoid Clixon had established hive ships throughout the asteroid belt, creating a network of bases that could coordinate swarm attacks against larger enemy vessels. Their forces moved in perfect synchronization, overwhelming individual targets through superior numbers and flawless tactical coordination. Dozens of species that had supposedly remained neutral in the galactic conflict had somehow positioned significant military forces throughout the solar system. The crystalline Zephyrians provided command and control systems that allowed the diverse alliance forces to operate as a unified fleet. The reptilian Sorok contributed mining vessels that had been converted into mobile weapons, platforms capable of devastating attacks against traditional warships. Captain Rachel Martinez commanded the U's Invincible as it led a combined fleet of over 2,000 vessels against the invading forces. Her ship served as the coordination center for an alliance that represented something unprecedented in galactic history, dozens of species fighting as true equals, their individual strengths combined into something greater than the sum of their parts. The battle raged for 3 days across the entire solar system, with fighting taking place simultaneously around every major planet and their associated moons. The galactic fleet found itself unable to concentrate its forces effectively, as Alliance vessels struck from multiple directions using tactics that had been developed specifically to counter traditional galactic military doctrine. Marshal Krixver command ship came under attack from a coordinated force that included vessels from 8 different species, each contributing unique capabilities to a tactical approach that overwhelmed his defenses through precision rather than brute force. The Annihilation was the most advanced warship in the galaxy, but it had been designed to fight enemies who used conventional tactics and familiar technologies. The Alliance forces struck the flagship, using weapons that had been specifically developed to exploit weaknesses in its design, targeting critical systems with surgical precision, while avoiding the heavily armored sections that traditional galactic warfare emphasized. Within hours, the most powerful vessel in the galactic fleet was drifting helplessly as its systems failed one by one. When the battle finally ended, the combined galactic fleet had been shattered beyond any possibility of recovery. Less than 1/3 of the original force remained operational, and most of those vessels were damaged beyond immediate repair. The survivors limped away from the solar system, carrying reports that would fundamentally change galactic civilization. The defeat was more than a military disaster. It represented the complete failure of the assumptions that had governed galactic politics for millennia. The established powers had built their dominance on the belief that superior technology and overwhelming force could maintain control over any challenge to their authority. Humanity had proven that cooperation and innovation could overcome even the most powerful military forces when different species worked together as equals rather than as conquerors and subjects. The Alliance victory demonstrated that the old hierarchies based on military might and economic control were no longer sustainable in a galaxy where information and technology could be shared freely among willing partners. Ambassador Kate Williams addressed the Galactic Council from the same chamber where Elder Kethmer had issued his warnings years earlier. Her message was broadcast throughout civilized space, reaching billions of beings who had never imagined that the established order could be challenged successfully. Williams spoke of a new model for galactic civilization based on partnership rather than domination, cooperation rather than competition, and mutual respect rather than fear and subjugation. She offered the established powers a choice. They could join the emerging alliance as equal partners, or they could be left behind by historical forces that they could no longer control. The ambassador's words carried weight because they were backed by demonstrated capability. Humanity and their allies had proven that they could defend themselves against any force the galaxy could assemble, and their victory had inspired oppressed populations throughout civilized space to demand better treatment from their rulers. Some species recognized the inevitability of change and began negotiating with the human-led alliance, seeking to establish new relationships based on mutual benefit rather than traditional power dynamics. The Zephyrian Trade Federation was among the first to acknowledge the new reality, offering to share their advanced transportation technology in exchange for access to human innovations in manufacturing and resource processing. Others retreated to their core worlds, preparing for conflicts they could not win but refusing to accept the transformation of the galactic order they had dominated for millennia. The hegemony recalled its remaining fleets to defend their most important systems, while the Vorthic Empire began fortifying their borders against the revolutionary ideas that were spreading throughout their territories. Elder Kethmar lived just long enough to see the fulfillment of the ancient prophecies he had spent his life preserving and sharing. The warnings had been completely accurate about humanity's danger to the established order, but they had been incomplete about the ultimate consequences of that threat. Humanity was indeed dangerous to galactic civilization, but not because they would destroy